We'll read from the end of the second chapter of the Gospel according to Mark and the first 6 verses of the third chapter. One Sabbath, he, Jesus, was going through the grain fields, and as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, "Come here." And he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm? To save a life, or to kill?" But they were silent. And he looked around them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. It's the word of the Lord. How are y'all doing?
Good, really good.
Yeah? Tired?
Me, no.
How often do we start a day asking, like, "Hey, how did you sleep? Did you sleep well?" It's an important question, right? You wake up and your mom asks you, "How did you sleep?" Sleep well? Everything depends very often on our sleep. There's devices now invented to tell us how exactly we'll have slept, and then we can check in the morning, like, did I actually sleep well or not? There's whole movements like defending the right to take a nap at work. Like now you need to be able, and your boss cannot say anything if you go lie under your desk for 15 minutes to nap. It seems to be one of our biggest endeavors of humanity, and not even just something from today, the fact that we're constantly trying to achieve a form of rest, to simply rest. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician, philosopher, thinker of the 17th century, already wrote, the biggest problem of humanity is that a man doesn't know how to sit quietly in his room. Doesn't know how to rest. That's the reason why he will go out and wage war or find distraction and entertainment. To simply sit there and face life as it is. If only. I also think like that. Like, if only I can, oh no, I'll rest. If only I just finish this first and that first. If only, and if we think further, if only I just have a bit more success. If only I achieve this, let's say, physical condition or shape. If only I manage to do this or get this form of recognition, this amount of income. If only, Augustine would say, we suffer from a restless heart condition. Restlessness. And while every other day newspapers publish findings and scientific research on the importance of our sleep and how to prepare for sleep and how to do exactly all of that, we may wonder, is it actually possible to find a real rest for my soul? How to rest from everything? Today's passage reveals Jesus as the true provider of deep rest, beyond mere physical rest, rest for our weary souls. If you've been here the last times we did this, you'll see that we're on a slow walk through the Gospel of Mark. We're in no hurry. The Gospel of Mark has been there for a long time, so we can take our time. And if somebody is interested in starting to read the Bible, we'll often say, like, let's read Mark together. And discover that Jesus is a very winsome person. He does not fit the religious mold. He might actually embody much of the complaints many people say, like, I like Jesus, I just don't like the church. Right? It's like, yeah, you might actually indeed. But have you read about Jesus? Have you actually read the Gospels? Let's do that. Jesus is both more radical than all Christians and simultaneously so much more loving than all of them together. But it's also dangerous. It's a challenge. I would say that it's very dangerous to read the Gospels if you would like to remain a distant observer of the Christian faith. Then it's dangerous to read the Gospel because Jesus might be more relatable than you thought. I mean, he lives our life and yet embodies that wisdom that only the creator of life would know. That wisdom that we call in the biblical sense, right? Knowing how to live well, something that we all possibly struggle with. I've, at least for one. And so as we're making our way through the first chapter of the Gospel according to Mark, we see Jesus indeed as he is, the protagonist of that Gospel, indeed of our world history, the proclaimer of the best news you would ever hear, the author of life, teacher with great authority, and yet the one who serves, the ultimate servant, friend of sinners, and as we would see here, the ultimate provider of rest and restoration. And in the sermon, what I want us to do is together to discover the intrinsic goodness of the rest that Jesus offers. Understand the nature of this rest and how it also is meant to provide goodness to others, goodness and restoration to others. And recognize together that only Jesus' goodness can bring profound rest to our restless hearts. In the Bible, rest is acknowledged from the very beginning, from the outset. Before any mention of sin and evil in the world, it's already mentioned in relationship to God. Genesis 1 tells us how God created the world, and every time he said, and it was good, and it was very good. And then Genesis 2 says, after finished all that work, God, Shabbat, God rested. He ceased his work. He sat back and enjoyed the view, we could say. If you've been in my home, I remember that moment, like we were arriving to our apartment here, and the first thing I did in our home was build a bookshelf in our living room. If you've been there, you'll have seen it. It was a work of 2 days. I worked very hard. Books are very important to me. And that was the first thing before anything else. There was not a couch to sit on. There was none of the bookshelves. And the bookshelves were done, and then I went to sit, on the floor. And nice. That lasted about 3 minutes, because then I said oh man, that part there, and that, and I should have done that. And next time I should. That rest lasted very short. That rest, that rest, right? Like to sit back and enjoy, this thing is done. It's never done. For God, indeed, he could say, it's good and nothing needs to be changed or added. It's a very good work. It represents who I am and what I've done. And that's why the Bible says there, he set that day apart, the Sabbath, to recognize God and the importance and the beauty of resting. That's not the kind of rest of falling exhausted on your bed after overworking and then or it's neither the kind of rest okay, wow, it's been a stressful period, now we're going to just sit on the couch, eat bags of potato chips and binge watch 3 series just to distract ourselves from the stress of the coming Monday. It is indeed a real rest, resting in a work that's finished, in God's work. And that's also why in the Exodus, when the people of God receive what we read with the kids this now as well, those 10 ways of living perfectly, what Ian read so beautifully. God says, I have rescued you from slavery. Slavery meant no rest. Slavery means you work every single day. There is no time to sit back. Non-stop toil and labor. Your only identity is whatever you can bring to the table for the Pharaoh. And God says, I am the Lord who delivered you. I rescued you. I love you. I will be your love, the one you put your trust in. So set this day, the Sabbath, apart. You will not work. Sabbath, as you know, is what the word God rested. Since God has done the work in creating and delivering you, the Israelites heard, you get to rest. It means that you belong to me. While the rest of the world may chase whatever, you declare, ultimately we depend on God. That's what the Bible anticipates from the very beginning, the intrinsic goodness of the Sabbath, of rest. And so on a Sabbath day, this beautiful gift of God, right, the Sabbath, it's a good thing. Jesus and his friends are walking through the fields. And as they made their way, it says the disciples began to pluck heads of grain. You see them maybe even without thinking, maybe, I don't know, and just eat some kernels of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath? I see them sitting in the grain field, spying in between, might it be like that? I don't know. Maybe they were just part of the group of disciples around Jesus, most probably. But if you were wondering, the Pharisees was not some sort of a secret police in the time of Jesus. It was not even a formal organization. You didn't have formal membership to the Pharisees. You could indeed make a Pharisaical vow to make part of it. But they were not by any means any recognized organization. Yet, At the time of Jesus, they were already for more than 200 years. Think about any political party existing for more than 50 years today. For more than 200 years, one of the biggest pressure groups in their society, both religiously and politically. That's the Pharisees. They represented the Jewish conservatives. But, they represented what being a Jewish is about, the Jewish norms and values. And they were going to be the moral example. They expected eagerly for a new Jewish king to come, a Messiah. And they thought if they would keep the commandments very, very strictly, he would come. And the Sabbath being the main one of those. The only thing is they forgot the real nature of the law. They didn't understand God and his love for human beings. The law became some sort of an instrument to show what they were, how religious they were, and not a means to love God and their fellow human beings. The Sabbath became something about what they did, or better said, all the things they avoided to do on that day, rather than the Sabbath, as we just heard, being about what God did and how gloriously perfect that is. It became about them. And their favorite question was, is it lawful? Is it lawful? Is it lawful? Is it lawful? That was their question about everything. Is it lawful? And so they see the disciples doing something unlawful. Why? Because harvesting, reaping is forbidden on Sabbath. And you could say, strictly speaking, that taking some grain from a field and eating it is considered harvesting, right? The problem is indeed that they wouldn't recognize God if he stood in front of them. The Sabbath is intrinsically good because it's given by God and should point to God and who he is. And we could have the same issue. We can laugh very quickly and say like, well, they don't have common sense. They're fanatics. They're fundamentalists. But I don't know how many people I see around me who get very, very tired with life. They may achieve everything, what they had hoped for, and yet it's never enough. It's never enough. Be careful to complain or to criticize quickly those Pharisees about nitpicking. When I look at my own life, if only I do better at my work. If only I get that approval. If only I get better at my sports and win that race, for example. Or if only I could just turn everything else off and get everyone else out of the way and live my life on my own terms. And we fool ourselves into thinking that these things will ultimately give us rest. And none of these things are necessarily evil, just as a Sabbath is a good thing that's given. But it has to point to God. The enjoyment and the rest to be gotten from these things can ultimately only be found in God. God says, it all starts with my rest, with my work. You do not get to earn my rest. Otherwise, there's only despair. Trying to please God or the rest of the world will burden you. Whether it's manifested in like strict legalism or in the total opposite. So you see, Jesus knows our hearts and he also knows our times and culture. Jesus knows very well what's going on. The Pharisees are longing for a messianic king to come, for that rescuer, a desire they express with all their fasting. They will refrain from eating, they pray, all good things. But they're anxiously, supposedly, expecting this king to come. And then what Jesus does? He recalls an event in the life of King David, the Messianic king, that great king of Israel that provided rest for his people, the one from whom would come that great rescuer that God had promised. And Jesus says, you know that David broke, strictly speaking, the law? When he and his group of soldiers, when fleeing at some point, hungry, entered the temple and ate from the breads of presence. That's a ceremonial ritual bread there that's only allowed for the priest to eat. And even the priest offered it to David to eat. And the thing is, don't you know that God's heart beats for human beings? That King David, even King David, knew that as he entered the temple, that he knew God's own heart, knew God well enough to dare to run inside and ask for bread. He did not doubt, and the priest serving there didn't doubt either. You're waiting for a descendant of David, Pharisees? All this religious life is an expression of longing for his coming, yet you don't recognize him when he stands right in front of you. Jesus is not just recalling a precedent. Jesus is saying, like, since David was allowed to break the law, I'm allowed to break the law. I don't think Jesus broke the law by any means. Not in any of those two instances. He did not. What Jesus is doing, he's setting himself on equal footing with King David, saying, I'm a king here. I am the Messianic king. I have come. These disciples are in the presence of the king, and in my presence they are understanding again who God is, what the heart of God is like. They're learning to shelter in God, to flee to him with their need, their hunger, and their thirst. You think the Sabbath is the most important commandment? Well, yes, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I am the entire reality of the Sabbath. Everything there is to know about God, his perfect work in creation and redemption, the God you do not recognize anymore stands right in front of you. Your religious observance cannot make me come down, but I have come down to do this for you, to reveal the God behind the law, to show my love for people, to do a new thing, to bring my people into rest. Well, maybe you're not worried in a Pharisaical way. You think about the observance of the Jewish law, like I didn't know it existed. And yet you find yourself indeed striving religiously to live up to the expectations of others or even your own expectations. I have those conversations quite regularly with people who are like, yeah, but as a Christian, you're not allowed to do this and all those. Like, well, what are your own expectations for your own life? How's that going? Let's just start there. We may become very religious and sacrificing a whole lot in order to come closer to that reality. You might not believe in God and yet try to please all other gods you have fashioned for yourself. The gods of success and work and looks and pleasure. And you know what? They're slave drivers. They will not give you rest. You will not give you rest for a single moment. They will not give you rest one day a week, not 1 second a week. They will never let you rest and sit back. Every moment of rest, of apparent rest you think you have, will be tainted. We become slaves of those things we consider so incredibly important, willing to sacrifice our health, our family relationships, our rest to achieve that one fleeting moment of human recognition, in whatever form it may come. It leaves you empty and exhausted, let me tell you that. Jesus says, look at me and see the real God, the only true God worthy of your trust. The true God is not as cruel as all those false gods you invent. The real God can be recognized by his care for human beings, his care for the hungry and the weary ones. He's the God of good work and real rest. I am he. Look at me. Trust me. You see, that's in part what I think the second half, beginning in chapter 3, is about. It's drawing us out of ourselves to the other. Whether you're a very churchy person at all, just know it's not about you. You're not the center of the universe. I'm neither, and that's good news. It's very good news. We do not have to excel in all things, and God will not love you more on the basis of anything you do or not. Even in helping others, you may say, like, I'm a very altruistic person. I help a lot of other people. I really understand about others, as long as they see me helping others. As long as somebody recognizes me. How many people get tired of serving? It's so recognizable. It wears us down. We make things so easily about us so quickly. Jesus, as the fulfillment of the Sabbath, shows us what this rest is about. It is the rest to indeed serve the other and seek their well-being. You know, it's still Sabbath. But now Jesus, from the fields, enters the synagogue. Synagogue is the Pharisees' favorite place. That's where they come together to study the law. A very good practice, by the way, to meditate on God's law. The whole Old Testament says, like, hey, blessed if you meditate on the law of God. Very good. They meditate there. They think about the law, devote themselves to God's word. And there we see a man with a withered hand. Let's not go into the details of whatever condition he had. His life is not in direct danger. He has a condition and he needs to be helped. And again, if I said in the previous passage, like jokingly, that they were like spying on Jesus, well, here it almost literally says they were spying on Jesus. It's like I see them with their scrolls of the law in their hand and then like, oh, let's see if we can catch him in the act. Let's see if we can bring legal charges against him. That was the whole intent. Let's see if Jesus breaks the Sabbath commandment. It's a sad irony, right? I think it's by no means established that Jesus did anything unlawful, but it's pretty sure that they broke the law. Because like spying on Jesus in that way, that definitely sounds like work. I mean, they were working. How little did they understand from what Jesus just said? How completely incoherent their behavior. So keen on pointing out the failings of others that they had no awareness anymore about where their heart was. No, none at all. And even less about God's heart, the God who had given them the law. Whatever they're arguing about the necessity to heal a man on a Sabbath day, they don't care about that man. They literally do not care about that man. It's all just an occasion. It's an example. They were only strictly worried about the supposed demands of God and their pious sacrifice in their way of life, and they forgot what God had said through the prophet Hosea. For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice. I desire the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Yet knowledge of God, for however much knowledge of the law, they didn't have. It's about knowing God. And that's what Jesus shows them, the true nature of the God of the Old Testament, which is the same God as the God of the New Testament. That he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, Psalm 145. So when he observes his attitude, when Jesus sees that, he gets angry. Jesus gets angry at those cold and stubborn hearts. He gets very fierce. He puts the man in the middle of everyone there. And he asks them, you want to talk about lawful? Let's talk about lawful. You want to have a debate on what's legitimate and what's not? Tell me, what's better, to do good or to do evil? That's an easy question. I mean, there he's setting them up, right? It just shows how hardened they are. Indeed, there is no way of understanding Jesus if you do not come to Jesus. Let me tell you that. By healing the man, Jesus would do something very good, which was lawful on Sabbath. Evil will be letting the man die. But yet the man most probably would not die if Jesus didn't heal him. So what's going on? So Jesus asks, what's lawful on a Sabbath? To destroy a life or to save a life? Well, that question almost seems like a caricature, right? Because, not healing him that moment would not necessarily destroy him if it were not indeed for the Pharisees who were looking for legal charges against Jesus and who, while worried that he would break the Sabbath commandments, are indeed in that very moment in their heads already planning to destroy Jesus. They're scheming how to kill him. How painfully ironic. The answer is clear. They were silent. They had no answer. They were exposed. Jesus exposed them right there and then. They have no answer. They do not desire to bend before God. Rather than fanatically trying to prevent themselves from breaking a secondary interpretation of the law, Jesus shows that it's about the positive side of the law, about how to do good to others, rather than trying to flee away from not breaking yourself. This is a day to serve others. God does not just want us to avoid evil, he wants us to do good. That's what much of this world misses out on. The rest that we receive to provide rest to others. We may be so busy constructing our lives and making them count that we barely have any awareness of somebody else's needs. We may even be so busy with what we think is so important, even trying to help others. We may be doing so many important things, even in church, so busy with all those things that we don't even see the people standing around us. We still think it's about us. Ultimately, it all depends on us. And when we do not get the appreciation we think we deserve, we are crushed. No wonder people get embittered. Does it sound familiar? But there's a cure for our restless heart syndrome. It's crazy, right? At the end of the text it says, the Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel. Well, it literally says plotted together with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. That's the paradigm of this world, you see? Whether religious or anti-religious, it will make you beg for approval. To be the good person, the values and principles. You may even suffer the imposter syndrome, right? You may even get everything you think you deserved. You may get the recognition you think you deserved. You may achieve all that success and then be worried that somebody might find out that you're not as big as you pretend you are. How many people suffer from this condition? Like, I hope they don't find out that I'm actually not as great as they think I am. That actually behind all my successes, I'm a very normal and maybe even a very weak human being. Even when you get some form of recognition, you're afraid people will expose you as what you are. Or, how long will I keep this up? At which point will I disappoint them? When everything is about you, it will not make you happy, it will crush you. Well, they are so keen on trying to protect what is lawful, these Pharisees, once they are more or less exposed by Jesus. And not even publicly, but just in their hearts, towards themselves. So Jesus is not putting them publicly. They know in their hearts what Jesus has seen. But then it says they plotted with the Herodians, who were supporters of the Herodian dynasty, Herod the Great and his son Antipas. Beautiful details, but this was a dynasty supported by the Romans. So while the Pharisees were fiercely anti-Roman, expecting their messianic king to deliver them from the Romans, the moment when they face Jesus, they're very willing to go quickly to those Roman supporters, let's say, to together kill Jesus. You get what I'm saying here? For both groups, Jesus was a threat to their power. That's an unexpected collaboration. You have here the conservative, the principal defenders of Judaism, checking on their own people whether they're behaving well enough, collaborating very quickly with the total opposite, with the liberal, progressive, pragmatists to whom God's law doesn't matter at all. And these two groups represent all of us, let's be honest. Those who think they're so religiously righteous and those who think it doesn't matter. Both sides will plot together to destroy Jesus. There are two sides of the same coin of doing it all for yourself, by yourself. In the beginning, I said that it's dangerous to read the Gospels. You remember that? It's dangerous to read the Gospels. And it is indeed, because you might indeed discover the glorious beauty of Jesus Christ. Right? The Jesus you didn't know. It will not, though, unless we're exposed as what we are in and of ourselves. That will never be skipped, that step. We will be exposed. Once we find ourselves with Jesus, He sees our hearts. But then again, Jesus won't crush you. But you just can't consider just Jesus some sort of an inspiration, because He will claim to be your only legitimate king. The Lord of the Sabbath, the only one capable of giving you rest. The truth is that both Herodians and Pharisees and men with withered hand and these hungry disciples and I very much need Jesus. We all have a restless heart syndrome and we need heart surgery. The hardness of my heart is a cause for grief and pain. And that's why Jesus needed to come to do His work and bring us into His rest. You see, this is not the last time the Pharisees will plot together with the Herodians. If you move 10 chapters along in Mark chapter 12, you will see them again plotting together. The Pharisees with Herodians, and it will lead straight to the cross, where both Jews and Romans, indeed all of us, will hang Jesus on the cross that Easter week. Both the religious fanatics and the seculars, the ones supposedly waiting for a deliverer and the oppressor together, will together nail Him to the cross. But yet there Jesus will fulfill His work as a true descendant of David, as the Lord of the Sabbath, as the one coming to restore creation. As He once said after creating, "It is good," and rested on the seventh day. There on the cross, a few moments before sundown at the beginning of Sabbath, it became dark and He said, "It is finished." And He finished a perfectly good work so that you get to rest. What is better, to save a life or to destroy a life? He asked. Jesus shows them in His own life and on the cross what's better, surrendering, destroying His own life to save ours. There the King died for unlawful people. In our place He bore our punishment to give us peace. The eternal God, Creator, had come for you and me to seek our good, to restore us and to give us rest. Rest from all our religious efforts in order to win salvation. Rest from trying to find approval and self-worth in this world. A rest that comes from having known God in Christ, from approaching His presence through Christ, from gladly obeying His will because we're no longer slaves to sin. In His presence where we are restored and receive the rest to serve others with Christ's goodness. How's your rest? How's your rest? Might not depend, first of all, on last night. This is the key to the Gospel of Mark. It's to actually come to Jesus and bring people to Jesus, to make Him your rest. Religious burdens are heavy. Our society's expectations and even our own expectations will crush us. The false promises will only exhaust us, and entertainment can only distract us for so long. You need real profound rest. Rest from trying hard, rest from craving more, rest from lusting, rest from trying to defend what you stand for. You know how to find rest for your restless heart? Hear Jesus' words. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. You cannot make your own rest. You cannot achieve it. You cannot win it. You get to receive it from Jesus Himself, to simply come and ask for it. So go to Him in prayer, give Him your exhaustion, and receive His rest for free. He will give it. All your efforts, surrender, and maybe pick up the Bible. Pick up the Gospel. Read about Jesus, the sum total of our faith. It's all found in Him. Go to Him and receive your rest, and become a person that provides rest for others by bringing them to Jesus as well.